in your estimation, and as you all put this BRC together, what do you think are the most difficult parts of, the wheel that you show, all the things that have to get done? What's the toughest part to get done?
Well, so I'll start. I have two that I sort of think about. And by the way, it's when you look at the wheel, I would suggest you don't cherry pick anything in particular unless it applies to your particular board. So one of the things, and some of you guys know this person, Lynn Elsenhans, has sort of been a board mentor for me for a long time. I've known Lynn a long time. And when I was talking to her before I joined my first board, one of the things she said was all boards are different. And she's right. All boards are different. The dynamic, everything is absolutely different. And so you have to look at the recommendations and apply them to your situation. We know that NACD is all boards, large and small. So just one word of caution. But I think the thing that I would say on the wheel that stands out to me has to do with the inclusive one, which is number 6. And so many times, and we had big, long conversations about this too, so many times people join a board and they kind of get hooked to somebody, or they kind of try to feel their way around, but there's not a really high quality, robust onboarding process that people understand how does this actually work. And to be honest, before you accept a board position, so I know everybody in here probably already on a board, but before you accept a board position, you should be asking those questions. How does this work? I remember one time I turned down a board because I found out that they had a bunch of cliques and they sort of had a hierarchy of different people who would kind of speak up and talk. I didn't want to be a part of something like that. So you should be interrogating that. But when you're onboarding people, making sure that it's a robust process, that people get partnered up with somebody to help them understand how to navigate, that the lead director or the independent chair is regularly talking to that person as you go along to be sure that they come together. To me, that's a really, really important aspect of culture. And in particular these days, as we are bringing in more people who have different backgrounds, whether they're out of the technology space or they're younger or they're people of color or from different parts of the world or whatever, if you want to have the richness of all those differences, then you need to ensure that people are getting engaged. You need to ensure that they're being welcomed. You need to ensure that their voices are being heard and that you create the space and the climate for them to be able to talk and not get overruled by all the people who've been sitting on the board for 10 or 15 years. So that's why I think that's a really, really important one.
I think that's particularly important nowadays where, it used to be you didn't join a board unless you were a former CEO or you were potentially a former CFO, and you had board-facing roles. You actually have people joining boards today that haven't had board-facing roles, which are, people who are in the room beyond their presentation, right? So if someone has a technology background, oftentimes the only time they've had any board interaction is when they go in and present, and then they leave. Or someone who is a diversity person or a marketing person, as I was. You go and you present and you leave, you really don't know what directors do. And so I think that's a really good point, because more and more now we've got functional experts, people who are specialize in certain areas, people who have unique backgrounds, and they haven't been in a boardroom throughout a meeting. So good point.
And the only thing I would add to that is, the way the wheel is organized, it's really sort of a third assessing yourselves, then it's maintaining whatever you agree is the right standard, and then it's dealing with the problematic directors. I think the reason this was such a call to action by the BRC is we're confronting such a different operational and societal environment right now. And so I think the issue here really was, let's get people to understand, because I think we all intuitively do, but let's get people to actually put what we think is important into action. So I think the first critical step is getting boards, and these are going to be the soft issues, to actually spend the time to assess, what is our board culture? Are we a really high-performing board? Can we really disagree with each other in critical ways? and still have a great working relationship. So assessing the board, I think, is absolutely critical. And hopefully everybody in here and all the boards around the country will actually do that. The other part of it on the back end is the problematic director.
So yeah, let's talk about that.
Okay.
Let's talk
Yeah,
about the
that's
problem.
that's where I was going to go.
There we go. Let's
You
dive
want
in.
to ask a question, or you want us to just
Yeah,
sort of
you-
jump?
So
Well,
jump in.
Yeah, so again, all of us have led teams throughout the course of our careers. And when people underperform, there were systems and processes to help deal with people who were poor performers, right? But at the board level, for some reason, we are just really scared to do that because everybody's peers. You got CEOs and CFOs, and they're not used to somebody telling them that they didn't perform or that they're not adding value or kind of whatever. So it's where everybody's walking on eggshells trying to have a conversation about performance. And so that's where I think that probably the most, at least in my experience, the most difficult thing to do is to have a conversation with somebody who you don't feel like is productive in the boardroom. Because everybody's kind of waiting, walking around on eggshells, or side conversations, this, that, and the other, and not really wanting to have sort of that hard conversation. Because it might be the former CEO of a Fortune 50 company, right? Who just happens to not be effective in this circumstance. I remember somebody saying one time, when we were talking about age limits, would you kick Warren Buffett off your board if he was however old he is? He says, well, I don't know if I'd kick him off the board, but I think I might ask him, or if he wasn't adding as much value, I think I'd say, hey, we'd like you to do more of this, right? And we'd like you to do less of that. And so that's to me is a really, really big deal, is people have got to stop walking on eggshells and decide that it's time to actually have those constructive conversations. And so I'm not talking about rock 'em, sock 'em, kick them in the hindquarters and sort of kick people out. But in fact, I'll even ask, so how many of you have had to ask somebody to leave a board in this room? So we have a few. So I'm one of those people. And I did it exactly how I did when I was working. I would make sure throughout the course of the year, hey, we need to see this different from you. We need to see this different from you. And then when it didn't change, since board work is a service, not a job, hey, this isn't working out. It's time for you to move on in a really straightforward way. So that's sort of how I'll start that conversation. Jarvis, you probably have something else to add too.
Well, I know you have another question coming up.
Nope, go
about,
ahead.
And I think what we talked about sort of a bit that I want to cover is the stigma around being off-boarded. And I think there's a few ways that boards can deal with that. One is don't run from the conversation. Have it early. Talk about off-boarding during your onboarding process.
Absolutely.
Make sure everybody understands now, boards have term limits, age limits. But how do you deal with a director that's being off-boarded for performance reasons? Talk about that during onboarding. That normalizes it. It creates an environment where, again, everybody understands, because hopefully you also have your tenured board members also participating in the onboarding. So you kind of have a conversation about off-boarding and what it means and why we do it. Something else that may be also helpful is continuously update your skills audit. Because as we go through operational and changes, the skills needed on the board, as we all know, have changed over the last 10 years. So if you're constantly updating that skills audit, and you've got that director, and you've got 10 boxes and everybody's name, and all of a sudden only one box or two is being checked for a certain director, everybody sort of sees, including that director, well, maybe I'm not sufficiently pulling my weight. Maybe I no longer have the skill set to be a productive member of this board.
Yeah, and I think the earlier you start this conversation, the better. So I actually think it goes back even further, and that is when someone is put on a board, asked to join a board, what are the expectations of that person? How have we set expectations? Does that person actually believe this is a Supreme Court appointment? Is this a forever? Because you are such a phenomenal executive, you've had such a phenomenal career, you are now here indefinitely. If that's the case, you got a problem from day one, right? And so there should be an expectation, I believe, when someone joins a board that they are on a board because of certain skills, backgrounds that are essential to this chapter of what this company is going through. We all believe there are different CEOs that are needed for different chapters. What makes us think the same board should take a company through a 25-year journey, right? And so setting the expectation from the very beginning, I think, is important. And then, as you both say, having ongoing conversations. Make it part of a routine. Make it part of an annual conversation about what do we like about these people? What do we wish they would do more of? What do we wish they would do less of? And having that conversation. It's like building a file on an employee. You all have fired employees before. You know what that's like. If you do it right, it should not be a surprise.